Hello and welcome, everybody. I am Matt Mayhew, Product Marketing Director with Adaptiva. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's a monumental occasion for Adaptiva, a massive accomplishment, quite frankly, a huge celebration. We are officially launching our Endpoint Patch product to public preview. We are so excited to show off this new tool that will help automate one of IT's most hated manual jobs. And also, we're joined by world famous hackers, cybersecurity experts, Kevin Mitnick and Brian Seeley. They're going to perform some live hacks for us and talk about why it's so important to patch all of your third-party applications across your environment. A quick piece of housekeeping before we jump in. Today, we'll be monitoring the Q&A box throughout the presentation. So if there are any questions, please direct them there. We will also save time at the end to perform a live Q&A. And we will be sharing a recording of today's event via email. So if there's something you'd like to revisit, or if you'd like to share with a coworker or a friend, keep an eye on your inbox. So let's jump right in. Allow me to introduce Kevin Mitnick and Brian Seeley, both world famous hackers, best-selling authors, and cybersecurity experts. They are going to discuss the importance of patching all your endpoints and show off how easy it is for hackers to exploit unpatched vulnerabilities. Brian, let me send it over to you.
Thank you, Matt, for that introduction. Welcome, everyone, to this special event from Adaptiva. I'm going to be your host, Brian Seeley. I'm a former Marine, a cybersecurity expert, and ethical hacker, podcast host, and a bunch of other different things. I'm probably best known for wiretapping the Secret Service and FBI without permission a few years ago. And that's kind of what put me on the map and put me on the list of higher end hackers. But that also qualifies me to tell you that our guest today is in the #1 spot in skill and being the most famous hacker of all time, which I'm really excited because it's always an honor to talk to him. Even if you have a limited IT background, you can understand what he's doing is essentially magic. But as you get to peer level, it's still magic. It's still exciting to see. So Kevin Mitnick, CEO of Mitnick Security, has an elite team of hackers, and they maintain a 100% success rate. Not 99, not 90, not good enough, 100%. And to penetrate the security of a system that they are paid to hack into. So that's a really important distinction. Using cutting edge social engineering and technical exploits. He's also the chief hacking officer for KnowBe4. It is I believe it's the #1 security awareness platform for training, teaching employees and companies how to protect themselves from hackers. And there is no equal in that either. So let's introduce Kevin with this short video.
I was a hacker because you get that adrenaline rush from the accomplishment of breaking into the system or finding a security hole or getting access to information you shouldn't have.
America is raising a generation of teenage electronics junkies.
It was in the early 80s that, for the first time ever, the public came to understand computer hacking as something nefarious and dark.
The FBI realized that these hackers have skill sets that federal agents and even local law enforcement don't know how to combat. And the government's reaction is to form cyber squads. Kevin's case was the catalyst for that.
Kevin Mitnick, probably the world's most notorious cyber thief.
Kevin ended up as the poster boy for computer crime.
The hacking of America. We've reported time and time again on massive computer hacks, everything from government secrets to data stolen from millions of retail customers.
We wound up in a situation where we're incredibly vulnerable. And maybe if we had listened hard enough to people like Mitnick, we would have built these systems a little stronger.
This is a story about obsession and unauthorized access, and that really pissed off the FBI.
You, sir, were once considered the world's most famous hacker. You're the most wanted man in computer crime, correct?
Yes.
Okay, you're a consultant now, but at one time you were, let's see, you bypassed the security systems of Motorola, Sun Microsystems, and Pacific Bell.
Yes, I did.
You served jail time for this. How much?
5 years.
5 years.
And a year in solitary confinement.
Why a year in solitary confinement? You don't look like a dangerous guy.
I'm very dangerous. No. The prosecutor had told a judge during a bail hearing that I could pick up the telephone and connect to NORAD and whistle the launch codes and launch a nuclear weapon. And because of this, the judge actually had a special order that I'd have to be held in prison without access to a telephone. So the only place they could put me was in solitary confinement. So I was there about a year.
Could you do that? Because that would be badass. That would be badass.
And I was playing this cat and mouse game with the FBI because I must have been a little bit crazy. And as they
were you actually taunting them?
Not taunting them, but I was watching them through the cellular phone system as I was able to work out their telephone numbers, and I hacked into the cell phone system so I can keep track of where they were. So if they got close to me, I would go farther away.
That's a good plan.
It's a really good plan.
Where does American ingenuity come from? It comes from creativity. It comes from people doing things that haven't been done before. The kind of people who are going to start Apple Computer and revolutionize an industry, very often that means that they're going to do things which are going to be out of bounds.
And that's why a lot of companies actually hire Kevin Minnick right now to protect their jewels.
My case has brought a lot of awareness to companies, security awareness. Hey, there's threats out there, you need to do something about it. And what I get to do today is companies use me to test their security, teach them how to remediate those problems so a real bad guy cannot exploit them.
That was awesome. I always get a kick out of watching that. Let's everyone give a warm welcome to the authority on hacking and social engineering, Kevin Minnick.
Hello, Brian. It's fantastic to be here. It's our first time actually doing an event together, so it's I think it's pretty awesome. And of course, the first time I heard of you is when you wiretapped the Secret Service or the FBI, and I'm reading this story about how you did this, and it was very intriguing. Then I'm thinking, wow, if I did this, I'd be arrested immediately. So I was wondering, what's going to happen to this guy? So
I was probably thinking the same thing, sitting in the guest suite at the Secret Service going, I made a mistake somewhere.
A little bit, yeah. But you weren't me. If you were me, you'd definitely been arrested, guaranteed. Yeah, because of my history.
Oh, but they let me know for sure. I lost all 9 lives, and that was it. I had no jaywalking, no nothing.
Yeah, no, I get it.
So yeah, it's exciting to work with you. Known you for a few years. It's still always in awe and love watching you work. So it's a thrill to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you to Adaptiva for inviting me to do this as well. Very exciting. So I'll pass it back to you.
Well, great. So our first question. We both seem to have a somewhat unorthodox sort of start in our, let's say, approach to being ethical hackers. Would you care to elaborate on how you got started that maybe wasn't in the video? Like you wrote the first phishing program ever?
Yeah, so when I was a young boy, I'd say around 10 years old, I was fascinated with magic to the point after school on the weekends, I'd ride my bicycle over to a local magic shop in the San Fernando Valley. It's a suburb of Los Angeles. And I'd watch these guys perform their tricks over and over and over again. And my mom was a single mother. She was waitressing 2 jobs, so she couldn't afford to buy me these tricks as a kid. But I wanted the secret. I wanted to get the bite of the forbidden fruit of knowledge. So I'd sit there and befriend these guys and just watch them. So fast forward to the time I'm in high school, I met this kid who could do magic with a telephone system. He was involved in a hobby called phone phreaking. I know that sounds weird, but it's kind of, to me, the predecessor of hacking. And he showed me all these cool tricks you could do, like you can call a secret number. And mind you, this was in the 70s. You can call a secret number and a computer voice would read back the number you're calling from. and only phone company technicians would use this. It was called ANI. He showed me how I can call one number, a phone company test line, a friend can call in another. It was called a loop around, and you could be magically joined and talk to other people without revealing your number, right? And I noticed this kid would always be using the phone during recess and after school. It was a one payphone. And I'd get up to him and I'd overhear his conversations, and he's pretending to be a phone company employee. He's talking to various people in this very, this terminology and lingo that I didn't understand. And I could tell he was just getting information, and pretty much they were doing what he had wanted. And this was my foot in the door of social engineering, because never heard of this. But one of the cool things that you could also do, there was a secret number at Pacific Bell, which was in Los Angeles, and you could call the number and just give them the phone number, and they would give you the name and address, because the secrecy was having the correct phone number. They assumed you were a phone company tech. So one of my favorite tricks, because I was a prankster at the time, so when I learned all this phone freaking stuff, one of my favorite things to do was change my friend's home phone to a payphone. So whenever his parents tried to make a call, say, please deposit 25 cents. So another friend of mine comes up to me in high school. He says, hey, listen, I know you're into this phone freaking. I know you're into ham radio, which is amateur radio. Maybe you'd like to take a computer class. He just started this semester. Okay, I wasn't so interested in computers, but I was thinking, what if the phone company goes computerized? I'd like to get a step ahead of that, as a 16-year-old. So I went and met the computer science instructor of my friend. He started asking me, are you senior? No, freshman. Have you had physics? No. Have you had calculus? No. Have you had trigonometry? No. He says, I'm sorry, you don't meet the prerequisites. So then my friend,
gatekeeping at its finest.
Yeah. So my friend goes, show Mr. Christ what you could do with the phone. So I started showing him all these tricks. And there was, in the computer lab, the only thing there was an Olivetti 110 baud terminal. There was a phone there. They'd use a acoustic coupler modem. They would dial up to the school system. So the instructor asked, he goes, hey, there's no phone number on this phone, and I want my wife to be able to call me. Can you get me that phone number? So of course I knew the secret number. I dialed it, I handed it to him and said, here's the computer reading it back. And this guy was clearly impressed. He goes, you know what? I'm going to waive the prerequisites and allow you into my class. And I'm sure he regrets that decision today as we're having this webinar.
So when people hear about a large hack in the news, something bad just happened. A hacker stole any number of things. It's either something to then sell or get money, or actually cryptocurrency. We consider ourselves hackers, but that has a negative connotation. Maybe you can explain why hacking doesn't always equal bad.
Yeah, well, there's ethical hacking and there's criminal-based hacking. I know a lot of the terminology people would like to throw around is black hat is bad, white hat is good, gray hat is you're kind of in the middle, or you've done bad things in the past and now you're a white hat. So, people ask me, do I still hack today? I get that question all the time. And the first thing I do is plead the fifth. No. So I say, yeah, but I do it with authorization. So really
paperwork. It's paperwork.
I get to do the same thing, Brian. I get to do the same thing. And, for a good purpose is we have clients that hire us to do what we call red teaming and pen testing. And we get to use, very similar tradecraft. It's really the same challenges I had when I was doing this on the other side of the law, 2-3 decades ago.
With all the penetration testing you've done, red teaming, in your opinion, is it possible for IT, the ops guys, to keep up with the growing number of third-party application patches? Can they keep up with the hackers who are trying to break in? Is patching at 100% possible?
I haven't seen it. So, we pen test a lot of organizations, from, Fortune 50 to, small SMB. And we've always found that there's no such thing as perfect security. There's no such thing as perfect patching. The only way that an organization can potentially get there where they're automating the process. And then where it slows down is patches could break things. They can break things in the organization. So there's always a time lag, and they have to, there's change control. There's testing the patch. Well, that's human involvement. That's not automated, to what I know. So that slows the process down, and it creates a larger window of exposure for potential victims out there. And I think about a recent pen test I did. They hired our team about a year ago, and we found a vulnerability in their internet-facing web app that was JBoss. But we didn't exploit it. We found another way in, so we kind of left it alone. But we told them about it. Say, hey, you need to patch this because this is definitely vulnerable. But we didn't exploit it yet.
I can guess what they did.
Nothing. They did nothing.
There you go.
So the next year, we said, oh my God, they never patched it, and then we went ahead and exploited it. And I'm thinking to myself, why aren't businesses listening? Well, we don't know what's going on the other side. Maybe to upgrade JBoss would require a complete rewrite of the application, right?
Custom code by a developer who got hit by a bus, or it's on an XP box and they had to virtualize it. And now they're stuck with this.
So they take a significant risk. Of course, there's other compensating controls organizations could do, segmentation and stuff. But even think back with proxy login, which was the exploit for Exchange, if you remember.
Oh yeah.
That Halfium Group had done. Well, the FBI, in an unprecedented move, actually went out and removed the web shells. And I don't know how many, but I think numerous businesses out there that were exposed. Now the federal government stepping in and saying, well, if you don't patch it, we'll help you fix it, right? So
they're like emergence. It's like FEMA, essentially. Like,
yeah, it's a huge problem.
Yeah,
patching is a huge problem. Normally, when we get inside and we're trying to move laterally, we're looking for systems that are unpatched. We're looking for legacy systems. We're looking for ways that we could escalate our privileges.
and that's the problem, because when the hack or a vulnerability gets disclosed and the CVE comes out, how fast are the bad hackers trying to exploit or scan for it versus the patch cycle?
Yeah, well, it depends on the CVSS. So if the CVSS is a 10, which means it's super easy to exploit and it's a remote code execution vulnerability, I think it's going to be weaponized pretty quickly. And
like 24 hours, 36 hours.
It's possible. Let's look at Log4j.
Oh yeah, that was.
Yeah. And companies still haven't patched it today. We're finding clients that haven't patched because it's extremely difficult, because you could have third-party apps that are using the Java logging framework and you just don't know it's there, right? So that becomes a problem. But if something creates value and immediate exploitation of a service or an application, there's going to be people that once that vulnerability hits the wire, hits Twitter, there's going to be people trying to weaponize that vulnerability. And think about, okay, what was it? November 24th, Log4j was publicized.
Yes.
3 weeks later, the Conti ransomware group already had weaponized that vulnerability and were using it to deploy ransomware.
Yep.
In 3 weeks with Log4j. So when you're looking at like Exchange vulnerabilities, like with proxy login, there's obviously a huge incentive to weaponize that vulnerability as quickly as possible. Then they hit Shodan if they're looking for just targets.
Anything, right.
And they just hit everything.
You could use Shodan to predict and be like, hey, this is going to be bingo of who's going to get breached first based on who hasn't patched this, or, hey, you've got an outdated thing. I think you have a bookie taking bets. So I think we have a demo coming up regarding two-factor authentication. We're always told two-factor, enable it when possible. Don't use a service if it doesn't have two-factor auth.
Correct.
And there are ways to bypass it.
Yes, and in fact, this particular demo that I'm showing you, we've tested numerous, mature companies using this trick, and the trick has been out there for quite some time, where we're essentially able to steal session cookies. But you can't take the position that just enabling 2FA is going to make you invulnerable to social engineering attacks. So let's go ahead and roll the video and see what it looks like.
Looking forward to it.
Many small and large organizations use single sign-on services like Okta and OneLogin to streamline user access to their applications. This provides an opportunity for the bad guys to leverage this knowledge in order to compromise the organization, specifically their employee or contractor computer applications, including email. They do this by using deceptive phishing attacks, and I'm going to demonstrate just how this works. Now here is the victim's computer. They're logged into their email, and their email is john.rafuse@target.us.com. You can see this here on the right-hand side. And so the objective of the attacker is to gain access to John's email and other applications. And in this case, we're going to demonstrate this with Okta. So let's go ahead through the email here. And we have an email from Okta support. We're going to go ahead and click it. And here is the from Okta support. And what the email is telling John is that he has to resync his Okta applications. And if he doesn't do so, he's going to be denied access to them. And that is stated right here. And this is a very powerful influence tactic. When an attacker is telling a target that they're going to lose access to something unless they comply with the request, it is more likely that the victim is going to comply. So, before we go ahead and click the link as the victim, I want to show you something. We're going to hover over the link, which is a button here, and on the lower left-hand side of the browser, you'll see that it's going to a link at Okta.com. Well, Okta.com is a very trusted company, so when people hover the link to make sure they're not going to a phishing link, they're going to trust this. And this is part of the major deception that the attacker has set up. So let's be the victim and follow through. So we're going to go ahead and click the link. And now we're going to have to authenticate to resync those applications. So let's go ahead and put in our username. Let's put in our secret password. And of course, John uses two-factor authentication like everybody should. So let's go ahead and send the code. And the code is received on my mobile device. So I'm going to input it here. And there's the code, and we're going to go ahead and log in. And here we are. Now the user is logged in. So there's an assumption here that everything is working and the Okta applications have been resynced. We'll even go into the email to make sure that it's working. So what the victim doesn't know is they gave the attacker complete access to all their applications using whatever they're allowed to access using their single sign-on provider. So let's go over to the attacker computer and see what has happened under the hood. So here we are. We're back at the attacker's computer here in the cloud. So what we're going to do is we're going to run a script. And what the script is going to give us is the actual session key to the victim. So the victim was using two-factor authentication. And so even though here we're able to obtain the email username and the password, we're still not going to be able to log in as the victim because we don't have access to the victim's mobile device. So what we had to do in this case is actually steal the session cookie so we can impersonate the victim and get access to the keys to the kingdom. So let's go ahead and highlight this. Then we're going to open a browser here on the attacker computer. First of all, we have to go to the URL of the victim, which is Target United States at Okta.com. And now we're going to go ahead and load into the browser. We're going to load in the stolen session cookie. Just as simple as that. We're going to close it, and now we're going to refresh the browser. And here we are. We're now logged in to the victim's applications in Okta. And of course, we can click on Gmail, and we have access to the victim's account. So I've demonstrated many of these phishing tricks in the past, but what's new in this case is when you hover over the link, it is going to a trusted provider. Just because it appears that come from someone trusted or something that's been approved by your IT team, never assume it is safe to click on it. You have to think about, what is the nature of the email? What is the sender asking me to do? Is it in the normal course of business? Have I been asked to do this before? Because even if you're cautious and hover over the link, you still need to stop, look, and think, because it might be deceptive.
That was, yeah, that's awesome. Because you regularly still see people saying, well, you just got to look for the little lock on your browser and then you're good. And if it's HTTPS, you're fine until, you know, the Let's Certify gives out certificates to anybody you want. Shifting gears for a second, as endpoints move away from this centralized location where we're all behind this wall and Trojan horse concept, and they're moving outside of the boundaries are just completely gone. IT seems to lose track, can't connect, can't get visibility. What does that mean for you as an attacker? How much of an advantage does that give you that IT can't keep track of anything?
It's a great advantage. You know, think about work at home since the COVID pandemic, right? And now organizations are still adopting work at home environments. I mean, for the offensive, meaning the attacker, it's actually it's good. It makes their job easier because attackers know it's much more challenging to manage the endpoints. Of course, organizations need to use tools like Microsoft Endpoint Manager and others to get a proper inventory, because before you could manage a device, you have to be able to talk to that device. It's just obvious. And typically for patching devices that are that are pretty much on the edge, that's where you typically need to find a good product where you could put an agent on that box, and then what the agent could do is enforce the patching and enforce it to go over VPN, proxy, if you're using zero trust, or that type of architecture, and then you force that device to update there. I remember in a pen test I had last year, more when we're more concerned about the pandemic, I had permission from the IT staff that I could attack them at home because nobody was going into the office. So the security manager had a FortiGate device firewall, and we found a remote code execution vulnerability. We didn't actually find the bug, a researcher did, but we certainly put it to use. We're able to exploit that bug, able to compromise the device. Then I was able to create a VPN connection to the manager's home. And then at the same time, the team was able to get the hashes in the environment. And I was able to pass the hash and actually log into the guy's laptop from his home network, right? And that's, again, Fortinet. That bug was out there for a while. It wasn't a fresh bug. He didn't patch it. He didn't upgrade the firmware. And that is exactly how we're able to compromise his home network. That's what it's really about.
For sure. What are the most common ways hackers get into a network? And what are least common or unconventional ways that they can still get in?
Well, didn't just yesterday, Uber got hacked through social engineering? So
just a lot.
Yeah, so that was done through a social engineering attack, how they were able to get into the VPN. It was a phone-based, what we call a phishing attack, which is kind of what I pioneered in the 70s of that type of social engineering, because phishing didn't exist back then. It was basically just calling users, and apparently this kid, this threat actor, 18-year-old, was able to call an Uber employee and get them to authenticate them with the MFA. So basically, hey, I'm with the IT department, we're switching you over to a new blah, blah, blah. And by the way, we want to go ahead and test it. Do you have time for the moment? Otherwise, you're not going to get access to the network tomorrow. Oh, yeah. I need my access. Okay, hold on. I'm going to push something to your phone. Are you on your phone now? Oh, yeah, you are? Okay, here it comes. Okay, just click OK. Okay, it works. Thank you. Goodbye.
This is exactly what we were talking about with the DEF CON social engineering phone booth, where you practice trying to be confident and convincing someone to give you that info. And it's like,
it's too easy. But not only that, okay, exploiting internet-facing web apps. That's number 2 on the list. Exploiting internet-facing network services that are unpatched. And that's typically what we find during an external network assessment is unpatched services. Weak passwords, poor password management, misconfigured 2FA. Because a lot of organizations, to save time, when they set up onboard a new employee, that employee doesn't have 2FA enabled yet because they haven't logged in yet. So on the first login, they get to set up the 2FA. And a lot of the organizations always use the same password for an initial account, like welcome 2022, right? Log in, okay, set up the MFA for the employee. Less common, physical, wireless, supply chain. And a more interesting one that's come to light that I go, oh, wow, these guys are bold, is bribery. At the Lapsus group.
I've been doing presentations about that. Like, we'll give you $40,000 a week.
Yes.
Just for access. Put an agent on the computer and we'll give you your commission.
Yeah, and they do it.
And it works.
I'm like, oh my God, it actually works. And these threat actors are deploying ransomware by bribing employees by paying them 20 grand, 30 grand, 40 grand.
Or as we're calling it now, affiliate programs and commission-based sales.
I find it harder when we're pen testing clients and they're using like services like CrowdStrike Falcon. That's a hard EDR to bypass, but we do it. But what makes it even more difficult is when they use Overwatch, which is their SOC. So their SOC is watching the EDR. Same thing with Carbon Black and others and a bunch of other EDRs.
Colonial Pipeline, ransomware victim. Everyone should have heard about it. There's a whole bunch of things now in the wake of it, but it was poor password management.
Yes, absolutely.
It was a valid credential being exposed in a data breach. You and I both know how easy it is. And can you explain to the folks at home how easy that finding some things?
I think it's worth actually just showing it. So let me go ahead and share my screen on this one. I'll do it live.
Let's do it.
So first thing I want to do is show how easy it is to crack credentials if we get hashes on the target network. So Brian, just pick a word.
Harmonica.
Please spell that. Monic. Is that right? Harmonica?
Sure, that works.
Pick two numbers.
47.
And pick two symbols.
$%.
$%. Can you see this clearly? I'm going to zoom in a little bit.
Yep,
okay?
it's totally clear.
Okay, I'm going to encode it. So it converts it to leet speak. So you take a credential like this that, first of all, has symbols, numbers, a word, and now we convert it to this leet speak. That's going to be hard to crack. So I'll just take this. I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to bring up.
Certainly hard to remember.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and run my demo. I'm going to put in the password. And what we're going to see is what we call the NTLM hash, because as we know, Windows stores the hashed equivalent of the credential, doesn't store it in plain text, unless you have digest enabled, but we won't go there now. But so here's the hash. So I'm going to go ahead and see if we can crack it. I have an 8 GPU cracker here, and I'm really curious of how fast we can crack it, but we're not going to watch it crack because that'd be boring. Let's go over to data breaches. So let me go over here, bring this down. Here's my site, xkeyscore.com, paying tribute to the NSA. I own that domain. So go ahead and let's see if we can find breach credentials, because what threat actors typically do is they'll go out when they want to target a company, they'll go ahead and look at data breaches. They'll look at where there's been credential exposure. I'm sure a lot of people on this webinar have heard of "Have I been pwned?" They don't give you visibility into other people's credentials, but that's what offensive pen testers like I always we want to get that for pen testing, and also the bad actors.
Because you want to assemble a dictionary of words to know what people have used, so that you can match them to NTLM hashes and rainbow tables and all that.
Well, how Colonial Pipeline was compromised is their VPN was legacy. It didn't have 2FA. So all the bad actor did was go ahead and look at data breaches and found a working credential. So we'll go ahead and put Coldpipe. I think that's the domain of Colonial Pipeline here. And let's go ahead and see what we have. And this is a live search of data breaches.
Yay! Soccer 11, Madden 11.
Yeah, and I could go fetch, it looks like we have 13,000 credentials. Now, what's interesting is people go, oh my God, my password's exposed, but I'm not worried. I changed it. That was from 6 months ago, a year ago. But what people don't realize is these data breaches give away people's patterns of how they choose passwords, right? So it's not hard to walk through this and go, okay, Gordon 24, is the new credential going to be Gordon with a 2-digit number, right?
Right.
You see Travis 1990, that probably is a child's birth year, right?
Yep.
You got the idea. This person likes cars, right? So you can kind of go through the credential list, Colonial.
September 3, then it's going to be October 4 or October 3 or whatever, because they're just complying with the minimum requirement.
Yeah. So this is the problem, is people reuse credentials, and it's not difficult for bad actors to look it up. So let's go over to see if we cracked the password. I'm just curious. We did. So if we look here, we started here on 1558.02.
19 seconds.
19 seconds later, here's the hash and here's the password. So that's how quickly we're able to crack a password. People out there might think, oh, that's super complex. Nobody could ever do it. Well, here we're able to do it in 19 seconds.
Yeah, it's like it's what people don't understand with the whole Bitcoin thing and the miners and the graphics. They combine them all, the amount of processing power can crunch numbers. But if you have a 20-digit password,
no, that's why
it's going to be a long webinar.
You need password managers. That's really the go-to.
Yep.
And passwordless solutions.
Let's go back to that was cool. What do you see as the difference between an offensive approach, red teaming, IT security, and patching versus a defensive approach?
Well, it is a defensive approach, patching. So when you're looking at patch management, password management, segmentation, EDRs, intrusion detection systems, post intrusion detection systems, threat hunting, incident response, that's all defensive. When you're looking at offensive, that's actually hiring a third-party company or using an internal team to do actually a penetration test, or what we call a red teaming. In my mind, organizations need to do both.
You can't just do one or the other.
No, you don't want to sit there just on the defensive and play whack-a-mole. Like hopefully we're going to be able to protect, because we're going to get to a question later, I think in this event, where we're going to talk about the attacker only needs one way in, and we'll get to that in a moment. But I did have a recent client. It was a mature client, and it really bothered me because they were running Carbon Black, right? So that's a reasonable EDR, and they were running another service, which was another tool, not really an EDR, more like a host detection product to detect threats and exploits and all this thing. So what I was able to do is I was able to get into their Carbon Black console and actually disable Carbon Black on the endpoints of the targets in the company. But what ended up happening is I couldn't disable this other product. And what would happen is the other product would email the security team whenever it detected stuff like pass the hash, whenever it detected
Mimikatz, whatever. Yeah.
Mimikatz would normally be detected by just your typical EDR, but I'm talking about technique. Network.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, that type of thing, which Carbon Black did not detect, right? And I was going, and I would set off those alarms. So how I was able to continue the pen test is actually how to get into the two guys that were the security teams, their email, and I just delete the alerts. Delete, delete, delete. But I saved a screenshot of those alerts, and in the pen testing report that I gave them at the end of the engagement, I was able to give them their email back. But that is how I was able to get around it. So that's why you should think about, if you have this type of product and you have a high level alert, maybe have it sent via SMS as well, not only email. Because you have to think, if a threat actor has gained privileged access in your environment, what's the chances they could tamper with the email?
Yeah, that would be like a write-only, read-many storage where you can't tamper with it. It's logs that are immutable. That text message is like a Hail Mary attempt, is just in case everything else gets compromised.
The only way to do that is flood the target's phone with a bunch of garbage text messages so they turn it off. That'd be the only way to get around it.
Yeah, too many alerts, got to tune it.
Yeah. So the whole idea is minimizing the attack surface. And one of the most critical exercises, well, not even an exercise, one of the critical steps is obviously patch management. Without patch management, you're leaving yourself wide open.
What could go wrong if they neglect it?
A lot.
I think you have something special to show us about neglecting third-party application patching.
Yeah, so it's not only important to patch the operating system, but also applications that reside on top of the operating system. Think of stuff Exchange, Log4j, right?
Adobe Reader.
Adobe Reader.
Microsoft Word.
How do we do phishing attacks that are successful? Word and Excel.
Macros.
Right? Yeah, macros, right? Very common attack methods, been around here for years, and people still leverage it. Let's go ahead and roll this video that I just recorded a few days ago.
Awesome.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Mitnick. I'm KnowBe4's Chief Hacking Officer, and today I'm going to demonstrate why it's so critical that organizations maintain an effective patch management strategy. Organizations typically patch their operating systems, Windows, Mac OS, Linux, and maybe even upgrade firmware. But what about applications that run on top of the operating system? What if an organization falls behind on patching applications? What could go wrong? Well, I'm going to demonstrate today how a threat actor could remove your EDR sensor. What is an EDR? That stands for Endpoint Detection and Response. And a very popular EDR product is called CrowdStrike Falcon. It's used by a number of organizations across the world, and a security researcher had identified a way to remove the sensor without requiring a secret maintenance token. So let me demonstrate how this actually works. Over here, we're logged in as an administrator to the CrowdStrike Falcon console. And over here is the endpoint. This is the endpoint where CrowdStrike Falcon is running. In fact, let's go ahead and bring up a shell. I'm going to go ahead and list the processes, but I'm going to filter it by FAL, looking for Falcon. And here we could see that Falcon is indeed running on this endpoint. A privileged user or local administrator could go through add remove programs to actually remove the sensor, but they'll need a secret maintenance code. Let me actually show you how that works. It's very simple. Add remove programs, CrowdStrike sensor. We're going to go ahead and uninstall it. And then it's going to prompt me for the maintenance token for this host. So I'm going to actually have to go over here to the console and look up the maintenance token here, or reveal the token. We'll go ahead and copy it. And then what we simply do is just paste the token into the uninstall tool, and it will uninstall Falcon. Now, this is the normal way that a legitimate user that has privileges or a local administrator would actually remove the sensor. Let's go ahead and do it. And that might take a few moments to run. And we'll give it a few more seconds if it's going slow. Oh, there we go. It's CrowdStrike Falcon has been successfully uninstalled. We'll close this and then we'll check. And we see that Falcon is no longer running. That's the legitimate way of removing Falcon if you're a legitimate administrator because you have the maintenance token. But in this particular case, a security researcher had found a vulnerability that allows anyone to remove the sensor without having the maintenance token. And if organizations don't patch this issue, well, it gives the opportunity for a bad actor to remove the sensor and potentially install malware. So let's go ahead and reinstall Falcon. Quite easy. I'm just going to run the sensor install. Let's go over here. We're going to go ahead and install it. Now, the install process takes a little bit of time. It might take a couple of minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video, and then once the sensor is installed, we'll go ahead and resume. So I'll be right back. Okay, here we go. CrowdStrike Falcon has been successfully installed. Let's go ahead and verify it. We're going to run the task list filter by FAL, and we can see it has indeed been installed. So now, as a threat actor, what I want to do is uninstall the sensor on this particular endpoint because the organization failed to patch, and this allows me to exploit this vulnerability. So let's go ahead and start the command prompt as an administrator. And then let's go over to the desktop here. Great. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go and bring up File Explorer. We're going to go to Program Data, and then we're going to go to the package cache. And now I'm going to look for the CS agent. I need the path to supply this to the exploit tool to actually remove the sensor. So let's go ahead and look at the third one. And here we have the CS agent.msi. What we're going to do is copy this path. And then I have here on my desktop, I have this tool called CrowdStrike Falcon Token Bypass. Simply means we could remove the sensor without having the token. So I'm going to run this tool, and then what I'm going to do is provide the path to this MSI file, and we'll go ahead and let it run. And pay attention, because you're going to see we're going to be able to do this without having the maintenance token. So here we go. Do I want to uninstall the product? Yes. And this may take a few seconds to finish. Okay, so now what we're going to do is go back into Add Remove Programs. Now that the exploit ran, we're going to run the uninstall. And then you're going to see we don't even need a maintenance token here. We could just uninstall the product. So let's go ahead. It gave an error, but the error doesn't matter. And we'll go ahead and let it run. And here we go. CrowdStrike Falcon has been successfully uninstalled. We'll go ahead and look at the processes. We'll filter by FAL, looking for Falcon. And here we are. Falcon has been successfully uninstalled without needing the maintenance token. So this is why it's so critical to not only patch the operating system, but also services and applications that run on top of the operating system to prevent a threat actor from removing your sensor from your EDR product. So everybody, please stay safe out there. Thank you.
Well, that's certainly encouraging. My favorite part was when the Windows notification came up saying your antivirus is disabled.
That's what the attacker wants to see.
But hackers, see, I think it's all about perspective. We can fail 99.9% of the time, but we can still be successful because all it takes is once. The defender has to be right 100% of the time and get it all right. You can't let anything through, otherwise it's over. Is that possible?
Brian, you only have 100% of death and taxes. That's 100% guarantee. With security, there's nothing that's 100%, right? So the goal is not to try to get 100%, because you're not really, I don't think it's possible to reach that goal. It's really managing risk, right? It's properly patching, and patching as many endpoints, whether that's Mac OS, whether it's Windows, whether it's Linux, whether it's upgrading firmware, and establishing an automated way to patch as much as possible. But I haven't seen in my lifetime any organization get 100% right, unless that organization is an organization of 5 people, right? Then yeah, then it's potentially possible.
So far so good, but it's the inevitabilities. It's coming.
Right. And also organizations need to think about risk-based patching. So if you have something like a 7-zip application running on your endpoint, right, that there's no known vulnerability that exists, but yet there's another, but yet you're running a vulnerable version of Office, that's easily exploitable and you're likely to get targeted and people are targeting people in the wild, well, that should be prioritized first. So what you want to do is look at prioritizing your patching based on the risk to the business, right? But of course, it would be great if we could just patch 100% of everything. But if you can't patch, remember when, PCI DSS, to be compliant with the credit card,
right?
The credit card organizations, what people ordinarily do is segment that part of the network and then segment it off, right? So you don't have to worry about patching that because it's completely segmented. Personally, I would patch it too, but that's how they get away with just, focusing on that small area. And I think different operating systems, different devices create complexity, right? And again, the complexity of having to have review, change management, testing the patch so it doesn't break an application in that environment. So the only way to even potentially have this, the light at the end of the tunnel, is through automation, is being able to use a product that could automate this and help reduce that window of exposure.
That would sure be helpful to a lot of people. I know that.
Yes.
What are the things that IT departments can do to stay safe that are often overlooked?
It's all about best practices. It's all about layering your defenses. It's all about being proactive, taking your security service seriously, being offensive and defensive at the same time, and really paying attention to your environment and your logging and your SIM, and having an expert team evaluate what's going on in your organization. So if, God forbid, you're compromised, you could remediate as quickly as possible.
So this is a race for any company to find the best automation solution. And before I hand it back to Matt so they can talk about the endpoint product at Adaptiva, that is frankly impressive. Thank you for coming. It is very clear why companies hire you. It is always good to see you. I look forward to catching up in person again sometime soon. And it would be fun to do another event with you because it's always a lot of fun.
Oh, absolutely, Brian. I mean, it's wonderful to work with you. I really enjoyed working on this webinar, creating the demo video with Falcon. And I really want to thank Adaptiva for the opportunity to present to this audience today.
Thanks, Kevin. And we will hand it back over to Matt to look at the endpoint patch product. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, that certainly was impressive. Thank you so much, Kevin and Brian. I don't know if I was more entertained or frankly terrified. I can't believe what it would feel like if my job was to battle against hacking wizards like you guys all the time. But I think Kevin mentioned something really important at the end there. The key to success is automation. And that's what we're here to talk to you today about, how Adaptiva's endpoint patch product can help you automate IT's most manual, time-consuming job. So what if I told you that you would never have to worry about patching again? Now that's a big statement, considering the size of the job, hundreds of third-party applications, all with different patching schedules, different testing thresholds required, different applications for business units, user groups, etc. But with our brand new endpoint patch product, we're going to bring real, actual automation to the table. We were just in Orlando last week at the Gartner Symposium, and people were super excited to see this product. And so I am happy to introduce Dan Richings, who is going to show you our brand new endpoint patch product. Dan, over to you.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everybody. Hope you're all keeping safe and well. In a few moments, I'll show you around our patching solution, but I wanted to first just provide a bit of an introduction into some of the components that I'm about to show, so that before we go into this, you can hopefully understand a little bit about how patches are created and delivered and the autonomy and how that works. So our story starts with the creation and publication of patch metadata. This metadata contains all of the required data for detection, applicability, installation and customization of software, as well as over 100 other fields that define properties such as description, release notes, dependencies, any related CVE information from which we can derive severity and risk, the product icon, and lots of others. Once our metadata team receives a request or an automatic notification of a new release, they'll create, test, virus check, and publish the metadata into the feed system, which will then be published to the customer's Adaptiva servers. And then once the customer Adaptiva server receives the metadata, it gets automatically distributed out to clients using the Adaptiva peer-to-peer system. Clients then receive the metadata, they perform a background scan to detect whether the new software is applicable to their device or currently installed, and then they send the results back to the server. So within, say, minutes of publishing an update, all clients should have run the scan and then sent back their status to the server. At this point, in addition to the administrator being able to view their compliance state for that release, as in how many and which devices require the update, several things also begin to happen automatically. This brings us to the second item, the patching strategy. Now, the patching strategy is the primary component within the Adaptiva patching system, within which the administrator can pull together all of the other components that define how you wish to handle the notification, the approval, the deployment, and the configuration of products upon the release of an update or patch. Once the new metadata has been received by the server, as well as being distributed to clients, some automation kicks in based on any patching strategies that have been defined that contain the product for which the update applies. So as an example, let's take 7-Zip. So imagine a new version, let's say version 25 of 7-Zip has just been released. Our metadata team would have been notified about the release, the metadata would have been added and published, and then this metadata would have been received by the customer Adaptiva server and sent out to that customer's clients. The dashboards would then immediately reflect that X number of machines require 7-Zip version 25. Now let's pretend that you've added 7-Zip to a patching strategy. Two things would happen simultaneously. The first is that all the notification bots for that strategy fire. If the version 25 update matches any of the filters defined in the bot, then the respective notification would be sent to the administrators defined in that bot. The notification could be an email, it could be a text message, Microsoft Teams message, a ServiceNow ticket, whatever kind of notification you wish to perform upon release of that update. The second thing that happens is that all deployment bots for that strategy fire. And again, if that version 25 update matches any of the filters defined in the deployment bot, a workflow gets triggered that will then handle the initial deployment of that release. Within that workflow, you can do whatever you like with that patch. You can introduce approvals at that point to approve the future deployment of the update. You can perform an initial deployment to a set of test devices. You can create service desk tickets or invoke REST APIs, or basically do whatever custom logic you want. You could even run the entire deployment at that point, all from that single workflow. However, what you'll more likely want to do is, instead of running the entire deployment from this workflow, it's handed over to the next component, the deployment channel, to perform the deployment. The deployment channel acts as a kind of queuing system for patches. So let me explain how this works and why it's important. So at the moment, we're talking about just a single patch for 7-Zip, but there's hundreds of vendors all releasing patches and updates constantly on different days and times. Each has its own set of requirements in terms of what processes need to be terminated, what needs to be notified to the user, whether it requires a reboot to complete the installation, that sort of thing. The trouble is, if we handle all of these within the deployment process and just deploy as soon as they're released, then the end user is going to be constantly disrupted by patches installing on their device. Instead, we can use a deployment channel to queue these updates until a suitable time, whether that's at the end of the day or 10 a.m. on a Friday, second Tuesday of the month, or whatever frequency and schedule you like. Think of it a bit like a train waiting at a station. The train will wait until its departure time for passengers to get on, and then at its departure time, doors close and off it goes, and any passengers that arrive after that time board the next train. In our 7-Zip example, this update could get queued along with several other updates for other products. Once the channel's scheduled time is reached, the deployment process workflow kicks in and the production deployment begins. Now, the production rollout can take whatever form you like, with whatever phases, notification, gates, and triggers you like. You can use a combination of waves and rings to control what devices receive the update and in what order. And a wave is basically a collection of business units, which we'll come on to in just a second. And from within the deployment process workflow, we can control under what conditions deployment to a wave can and will take place. Once we deploy to a wave, a separate rollout workflow is invoked, which then performs the final patch deployment to clients and has some similar logic and controls. So I just mentioned business units. Think of these as the logical grouping construct for different classifications of devices. A business unit could be a grouping of machines by the most common use of the term. It could be different business functional areas or units, such as accounting devices or HR devices, engineering, manufacturing. Or a business unit could be a grouping based on device type, such as servers or desktops and laptops or tablets. Or it could be by hardware manufacturer, Dell, HP, Lenovo, 64-bit, 32-bit. Could also be by geography, all North American devices, all EMEA devices, all APAC devices. You can apply whatever criteria you want to use to group machines. The function of a business unit is to provide you with a way of applying similar characteristics to groups of machines. And this could be similar maintenance windows or reboot schedules or user interaction settings, notification settings, approval chains, or, as per this example, rollout behavior. A rollout basically provides a way of performing a phased deployment within a business unit. Again, the scope of the business unit is up to you. It could just be all devices, and then you can control the rollout across all devices. Or it could be regional or office-based, or it could be as granular as you like, down to a single office or team. Once you've modeled the behavior once for a business unit, it will behave that way every single time. And once the rollout process kicks in, the actual client deployment takes place and the machines will perform their installation. At this point, clients will then install the patch. Any appropriate client-side notifications will get thrown to the user. Any required process terminations will be prompted and terminated. The software will get installed, and then any required reboots will take place in accordance with any notifications and reboot windows. During the download and the installation, status will get uploaded to the server in real time, and the dashboards will update in real time to reflect that status. You'll be able to see activities taking place as they happen. So with all of this as a backdrop, let's take a look at some of these components in more detail. In a moment, I'll take you behind the scenes and show you how the metadata gets added into the system. But before I do that, let's just set the scene a little bit. We'll take a quick look around the system to assess current state, and then we'll see how a particular scenario plays out. Within this lab environment, as you can see, we have 109 devices. We also have 539 products and 670 patches and releases. My environment's currently sitting at 56% compliant and has a risk score of around 130. Risk is calculated based on some customizable metrics which you can define over in the risk assessment settings section. And scrolling down to the bottom, we can see our top 5 non-compliant products, which are all sitting at 0% compliant, meaning that every installation of that software is running an outdated version. We can also see our top 5 missing patches and releases based on their contribution to the overall environment risk. In a production environment, these will be the applications to focus our attention on. If we look over in the patching state overview, we get a patch status summary and a trend chart over time, as well as a breakdown of all applications for which we have metadata and their compliance level. We can then switch the view to products to view summary information by product, including compliance, risk contribution, and a similar table showing machine counts and compliance. If we switch to patches, we can go one layer deeper and see summary data for the individual releases and patches that exist within each product, including our top most risk contributing patches and a table showing the install counts and risk. And then finally, if we flick over to devices, we get a summary across all devices and a breakdown showing all machines and their individual contribution to the environment's compliance and risk. Pay particular attention to the device VM100 as we'll be using this to demo our metadata scenario in just a second. But as you can see, the device currently has a risk score of 236, the highest in the list, and 14 products installed. Let's open up a connection to this device and take a look. If we open up Programs and Features, we can see a bunch of software installed. Now remember that this device showed 14 products installed, and we can see all of those listed here. What we don't see listed here, however, is a product called Junction 21, which is the product that we'll be using for this demo. For this product we have two versions, 4.60.0311.1001 and a new release ending 1002. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to install the old version 1001 onto this VM100 machine. If we refresh programs and features, we can see that Junction 21 is now showing up. So let's see how we go about patching this going forward. I'm now going to take you behind the scenes a little bit and show you the process that our metadata team go through to add metadata for new software into the system. We've got a dedicated team that are constantly adding new metadata into the system, whether that's newly discovered products, new releases for existing products, or customer requests which take the highest priority. For this Junction 21 example, this would be a new product and a new release. So the first thing the team would do is they would test, analyze, and extract the metadata from that new software. That would include all of the detection logic, the dependencies, the install, repair, and uninstall commands, as well as security information such as the SHA-256 hash. And if the release has any associated known vulnerabilities or CVEs, those will also be noted. They would then create the software product object, filling in the fields in all of the tabs along the left with all of the metadata relating to that product. Once the product's created, they'd then create a new software release group and a software release object which would contain further information pertaining to that specific release. In the interest of time, I've pre-created the Junction 21 software, so if we go back and we search for Junction 21, we can see that it's approved for publication, but it's not yet published. And we'll do that in just a second. If we click into this object, it will open the product and we can see some of the associated properties. We can also navigate into the software release groups for this product, and then again into the software releases. A single product can have multiple release groups, and each release group can have multiple releases. This basically allows us to support multiple versions of software, not just the current release, because there may be times where you don't want to be on the latest and greatest and want to only apply up to N-1, for example. For this release, we can see it's Junction 21 4.60.0311.1002, which is the next release after the one that we just installed onto VM100. Let's publish this software and then take a look what happens. So what's happening now is that the feed is being sent from the Adaptiva hosted metadata server out to our customer's Adaptiva servers. The customer server will see that a new piece of content has been published and will send out an instruction immediately to all clients to perform a scan for that software and send back results. Of course, the instruction as well as the metadata for that product and release will not be directly sent to each client from the server, but rather distributed discreetly through the Adaptiva peer-to-peer system, and likewise with the status that gets returned. Let's go back to the customer Adaptiva server. The entire process from publishing metadata to the server receiving it, the client scanning for it, and the results coming back and showing in the dashboards should take no more than about 5 to 10 minutes, even in production. If we take a look back in the dashboards, we can now see that VM100 is now showing 15 products instead of 14. And if we flick over to the products dashboard and search for our Junction 21 software, we can see that it's present in the table as a new piece of software, that it's currently installed on one machine, and that one machine requires an update because we published a later version than we installed on the client. So this is how we can very quickly yet comprehensively add new products and patches into the system. And we strongly encourage you to submit your application lists early so that we can prioritize adding the software that you care about. But based on other lists that we've received, there's a good chance that the majority of your software is already covered. Now let's take a look at how we can configure the system to not only perform the update to a new version of software, but how we can automate the entire process, including any environmental complexities that you may have, such as phase deployments, approvals, and any custom behavior. And this is where patching strategy comes in. And as the name suggests, this principal object is responsible for defining the overall strategy for a product or group of products. It governs the behavior of the platform whenever new versions of the assigned products are released, and it does this by bringing together many different components that you can configure and tailor to your requirements. We'll take a look at some of these components now. Following the same scenario all the way through, let's continue with our Junction 21 example. And let's say that we want Junction 21 to get automatically patched whenever a new release comes out. We'll start by creating a new patching strategy and giving it an appropriate name, in this case Junction 21. There's now a few fields to fill in, starting with the patching process schedules, and this is where things start to get a bit interesting. When we create a new schedule entry, we're asked for a couple of things, including a timeout and a schedule on which to execute, but most importantly, a patching process workflow. This workflow is what's used to perform the initial automation, and it's this workflow that we can add a whole array of different functions and activities. We'll come back to this in just a minute, but for now, let's add the workflow that we'll be using for this example. We'll also add an execution schedule of every day. Next, we can add a notification schedule. And again, this is workflow controlled, so we can perform a whole manner of tasks for notifying relevant parties about the addition of a new update. We also have some other options here, such as the schedule on which to execute, and whether to notify various notification chains. Again, we'll just add a workflow here for now, and the everyday schedule. If we scroll down, we get to the pre-staging settings. As we saw at the start, on publication of metadata, clients will immediately scan and report back the presence of software so that the server knows which devices and which offices have the software installed, and which may require it at some point in the future. The IntelliStage settings will instruct the server to automatically distribute the content for the selected products to the best 3 suited machines in each location that will require it. And by best suited, I'm referring to an election process that takes place to pick the most likely devices to be online and available. The client content pool setting functions in a similar way, but instead of staging to the office, it will stage the content to all machines where the update is applicable. This means that when the time for installation occurs, the content's already present on the device and it doesn't have to download. For this example, let's enable the client content pool so that every client that requires it will start to download the Junction 21 content. Next, we get to select the content that we wish to add into this strategy. Any content that gets added to the strategy will behave the same way according to the other components and settings within the policy. For different behavior for different products, we would create different strategies. You may want to have one strategy, for example, that covers all critical software, or one that covers a specific group of products. Here we'll browse for and add our Junction 21 software, which is now available after receiving the metadata. We also have the option to apply to all products in case you wish to apply the same strategy to all products present and future. We could then add a notification chain and an approval chain into this patching strategy. We can then reference these chains within the patching process workflow to send out notifications or request approval from a single admin or user, or multiple admins and users. And we'll leave these blank for the time being. Next, we have the deployment waves and deployment channels, and again, this is where we can add a lot of flexibility into the process. The deployment waves are basically a collection of business units, and a business unit in this context is basically a logical grouping of devices. It could be a business function such as finance or legal. It could be a device classification such as ATM devices, servers, desktops and laptops, or it could be a static collection of test devices. Whatever the criteria, it allows you to deploy updates to different systems at different times and using different settings such as maintenance windows, reboot windows, user interaction settings, rollout workflows, and lots of others. We'll come on to business units in a few minutes. The deployment channels is what I referred to at the start using the train analogy. It allows us to effectively queue updates until a suitable time when they can all be installed together, basically reducing the disruption to the end user by only performing a single notification, installation, and if applicable, a reboot per channel. We'll come back to this later, but we'll leave it blank for now. And then finally, we have the bots. The bots are the controllers for the patching strategy. They control when patches get added to the patch list for the respective strategy, and whether or not to perform the alerting process to inform users or admins of the update release. Let's save this object and then quickly recap the process so far and how this might translate to the real world, as I appreciate there's a lot going on. So within the patching strategy, we've told it what products we want to target. In this case, just Junction 21. We've given it a patching process workflow, which will perform the initial automation, and we've provided some behavioral settings. We've also provided the business units to target via our deployment waves, which contain the actual devices that will receive updates if applicable. We then have 2 different ways in which we can provide the automation, either by performing everything within the patching process workflow, which would happen whenever the respective patching process schedule fires, or we can leverage deployment channels to queue updates until an appropriate time. So how does this translate to the real world? Well, what we've tried to do is account for any intent to be modeled, so we've provided a lot of versatility and configurability. Let's say you have a bunch of software that's updated frequently but doesn't require the user to terminate processes, doesn't require a reboot, and it's relatively unobtrusive. Web browsers are a good example of this. Well, for these, you may want to deploy them immediately to all systems. You could leverage an immediate deployment channel for this and add the patch to the immediate deployment channel via the patching process workflow, or you could handle the deployment completely within the patching process workflow itself. The latter is what we've modeled here for our Junction 21 software. If we take a look at the workflow that we selected, you'll get some idea about what's going on and what it's capable of doing. For anyone not familiar with the Adaptiva workflow system, it's basically a drag and drop interface that allows you to define a process without having to write code or scripts. Whatever we add between the start and end nodes will get executed in sequence, and we can add various bits of logic to control the flow. These workflows will, for the most part, be built in, but will allow you to create your own or use the built-in ones as templates so that you can extend from them. This particular workflow that we're using for this example is fairly simple. We start by requesting approval for this patch to be added to the system. If approval is granted, we then perform an initial deployment to a test lab. After 24 hours, we request approval from the lab manager to proceed to the next step, which is then the production deployment. Now, you may be wondering how the workflow knows about the test lab or the lab manager. These are defined within the business unit that we targeted through the deployment waves object. We'll take a look at how these workflows and business units interoperate in just a few minutes. But as you can see, the entire process from initial approval, test deployment, validation, and production deployment are all handled in just a few workflow activities and through a single patching process workflow. After saving the patching strategy, we can then navigate to the deployment section and monitor this through the patching cycles dashboard. This shows us that we have one active patching process for our Junction 21 patching strategy, and that it's currently at 21% complete. From the Actions menu, we can stop the process, we can pause it, we can restart it from the beginning, or we can edit its approvals. And clicking into it will show us more details, including any comments that have been made by the approvers, as well as device metrics for the devices targeted, and patch information for the patches being deployed. We can also add our own comments. Now let's change our strategy slightly. Instead of running everything from within the patching process workflow, let's instead leverage the deployment channels. We'll still use the patching process workflow to perform our initial approvals and lab deployment, but this time, instead of deploying to production from within the patching process workflow, we'll add the patch to the deployment channel. First thing we'll do is we'll add our deployment channel, and for this we're going to use our weekly channel. This channel fires at 2 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. Any patches released before 2 p.m. on Thursday will get queued up and applied automatically at that time. The only other thing we need to do is change our patching process to use a different workflow. If we take a look at this workflow, we can see that it's actually quite similar to the first, with the main difference being that it's adding to the deployment channel as the final step. If we save the patching strategy now, the change will get applied, and whenever a new version of Junction 21 is released, it will get automatically processed and added into a deployment channel for execution at 2 p.m. on Thursday. Let's take a look at what these deployment channels are doing, and let's look at our weekly 2 p.m. Thursday channel that we just used in our example. Here we have our schedule, which is a simple schedule that executes every Thursday at 2 p.m. We also have our deployment waves object containing the business units to target, or we can accept patches for all business units. We have a notification chain, and we have our deployment channel process, which again is a workflow, many of which come shipped with the product. We can also create channel merging rules that define how different channels can be merged together, and the same content staging settings that we had in the patching strategy. Let's take a quick look at the deployment channel process workflow. Here we see that we have slightly more steps than before. This time we have a bit more change management happening and a few more deployment stages. We start by seeking approval from the lab manager, and if you remember from before, we still had the test deployment to the lab devices being handled by the patching process workflow. So here we're validating that the lab manager is happy with us to proceed with production deployment. If approval is granted, we proceed with phase 1 deployment. As we're expanding into production, we're going to seek approval from the business owner, and if the business owner approves the request, we proceed to our phase deployment. We iterate each deployment wave within the deployment channel and deploy to each business unit within each wave, waiting for 24 hours between waves. The idea here being that if anything were to go wrong during the deployment, we could pause or abort the deployment before it moves onto the next wave. At the end of each wave, we send a notification to the notification chain to inform them of progress and to send them a link to the dashboard. Let's take a look at what that dashboard might look like. Here we can see 2 running deployments, one completed and our active deployment for Junction 21. Again, we have the options to stop, pause, restart, and edit the approvals for each active deployment. So during that 24-hour period between waves, we could come in here and pause or abort the deployment by clicking one of those buttons. Clicking onto our deployment, we can see further details about the current state and historical state of this deployment, along with device metrics and comments. So now let's talk about business units. Up until now, we've been referencing business units all over the place, but without actually talking about what a business unit is or how it's used. I mentioned already that a business unit is a logical grouping of devices based on whatever criteria or classification you like, and that they allow for different settings to be applied to each of these groups or devices. So let's take a look at this. When the product installs, a large number of business units will get created automatically based on common grouping criteria such as location, device type, that sort of thing. But you can also create your own. Here we're going to create a new blank business unit. The first thing we'd do is we'd give the business unit a name and an optional description and priority. We can then optionally set up relationships with other business units by setting the parent, child, and lab business units. We can also give one or more custom lab business units too. The key thing to bear in mind here as we discuss these fields is that all of these properties are for providing dynamic behavior within our process workflows. For example, when we add an activity to our workflow to deploy to Wave 1 labs, what we're doing is we're grabbing all of the business units in our first deployment wave, checking to see if they have a lab business unit defined, and if so, deploying to the devices in those lab business units using the lab business unit settings. If we scroll down, we can add health checks, which can be run as part of the process workflow, and we can then validate that the health checks ran successfully before continuing. These health checks are integrated with our endpoint health product, and you could have health checks that perform whatever logic you like. They could check that a particular service is running after installation, that the device can still ping the domain controller, that they can still reach an external website, that they can still resolve a DNS name, the registry settings set correctly, all sorts of things. You could then add logic to handle what would happen if the device failed any of these health checks. Similar sort of thing with UXM expressions. UXM stands for User Experience Management and would allow you to check the device for various user or device performance characteristics. Next, we have approval chains, and again, these are what we referenced as part of our example workflows earlier. The 5 default approval chains allow for easy reference to these specific approval groups from within the workflow, but you can also add custom approval chains to each business unit. Hopefully by now you're sort of starting to see the power and versatility of business units that basically allow us to define a single process workflow that performs the same thing time and time again, but allow differences in behavior to be modeled for different groups of machines and different end users or intermediaries by defining different settings within the business unit itself. We can add a notification chain to the business unit, and we can add deployment rings and a rollout process as well. We'll come back to these in just a second. Finally, at the bottom, we can define different user interaction settings, maintenance windows, and reboot windows. User interaction settings include things such as installation deferral, reboot postponement, pop-up notifications, that sort of thing. So you could, for example, have different notification settings defined for a business unit containing servers to one that contains, say, desktops and laptops, or different windows for business units with different working hours, for example, such as shift workers. So let's go back up to the item that we skipped past, the rings and rollouts. These give us our final granular level of control, controlling how patches get delivered within a business unit itself. Going back to our very first example where we deployed Junction 21 to a business unit called All Systems, let's take a look at that business unit. Here we can see that although it's intended for deploying to all devices, it still has a lab business unit referenced, which allows us to first roll out to test devices. And scrolling down to the rings section, we can see that it has 3 rings defined. The first ring for pre-production phase 1, the second ring for pre-production phase 2, and then finally all clients as the third ring. So how does the patch get rolled out to those rings? Well, that's where the rollout process comes in. You can think of this as the per business unit workflow that executes and controls the deployment to the actual groups of devices within each business unit. So when the patching process workflow or the deployment workflow runs an action to deploy to Wave 1 or Wave 2 or Wave 3, it hands control over to the business unit, which invokes its own rollout process workflow, which will then handle the deployment. Let's take a quick look at an example rollout workflow. Here it's quite simple. Again, we're doing a quick approval request and then deploying to each ring in turn. And between each ring, it stops and checks the success of the previous ring deployment and the results of the health checks. And like the previous 2 examples, we have a dashboard that we can use to monitor each rollout process, as well as viewing and controlling it at any point of its life cycle. So we've seen patching processes, deployment processes, and now rollout processes. The 2 final bits that I mentioned at the beginning but didn't go into at the time are the bots, the deployment bot and the notification bot. These bots provide the automation that kickstarts all of these processes and activities that we've been looking at. If we take a quick look at the deployment bot first, we can see that again this leverages a workflow and it also uses a patch filter expression. The patch filter expression is used to automate the processing of patches based on any available metadata property. So for example, we could have a patching strategy specifically for critical patches, and could automatically add a patch to that strategy if its criticality rating was urgent, or if a known exploit exists or any other property. If we look at notification box, we see the same filter expression can be specified. We can also specify an expression to be used as the output for the notification, as well as a communication provider, which if we look at, it allows us to define the type of communication the notification will use, whether that's email or SMS or Teams or WhatsApp, or just some custom logic via the workflow. With all of this in place, we can then kick back and bask in the glory of knowing that every month, without having to do anything at all, the patches will get automatically handled. But not just handled the same way every time according to whatever trivial or complex business processes, change control and rollouts need to take place. And if business conditions change or new business processes get introduced, it's just a simple case of adjusting a business unit or workflow. The only thing left to close the loop on this is to check what happened on our VM100 client and our Junction 21 product. Let's bring up a dashboard for this device. Here we can see the patching compliance, risk and trends over time, and at the bottom we can see the patch status and product status details for everything on that device. And we can see that Junction 21 is installed and compliant. What I haven't been able to show you in the lab is the real-time nature of these dashboards. In a production environment where there's cycles in progress all the time, machines downloading content, installing software, sending back status, these dashboards would really feel alive, constantly updating as devices send back status. But this is about all I have time to show. Hopefully the versatility and configurability of the product is evident, and I'm hoping that you can start to imagine how some of these components could be leveraged in your environment. I guess the key takeaways are full autonomy, configure once, then fire and forget. No more manual effort every time a patch is released, just let the patching strategy handle it according to your business processes and requirements. Real-time reporting and control into all aspects, so not just patch compliance reporting, but granular detail, updated in real time, including the active processes that are running across the organization. And then finally, the customer experience. We want to work with you to not only add metadata for the software that you care about, but also help you engineer workflows and processes that handle your business processes, and where appropriate, share those processes between customers across similar verticals, geographies, and industries. And so with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your time, and I'll hand it back to Matt. Thank you.